In 2015, people in Greece woke up and walked to their banks like any other day, except the doors were locked. Not for lunch, not for a holiday. Locked because the government ordered them closed. ATM screens didn't say insufficient funds. They didn't say account error. They showed a limit, 60 euros per day. You could have 10,000 euros in your account and still only touch 60. That was the moment millions of people learned something they had never been told. Money in a bank is not money you control. It's money you're allowed to access, and the permission can be revoked. At first, people stayed calm. They told themselves it was temporary. They trusted the statements on the news. But then something else happened. They tried to use cash. Because cash is what you reach for when systems fail. Cash doesn't need permission. Cash doesn't need approval. Cash doesn't need a network. Cash is what you hold when everything else freezes. And that's when the real panic started. Because cash disappeared. ATMs ran dry. Stores stopped accepting large bills. Withdrawals were monitored. Questions were asked. People realized they weren't just locked out of banks. They were locked inside the system. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't mismanagement. And it wasn't unique. It was a pattern repeating itself again. Every financial collapse in history follows the same sequence. First, the system becomes unstable. Then, people try to escape. Then the exits are sealed. The exits are never sealed loudly. They are sealed politely, with limits, with temporary measures, with phrases like for stability and for your safety. But once the exits are sealed, the outcome is decided. Because financial systems don't collapse when numbers break. They collapse when trust breaks. The moment people lose confidence, they try to turn promises into reality, digital balances into cash, statements into assets, numbers into something they can hold. That conversion is the moment of danger, and that is exactly what modern systems are designed to prevent. Cash is the last form of money that still behaves like property. If it's in your hand, it's yours. If it's hidden, it's hidden. If it's moved, it's moved. No intermediary, no log, no approval. And that's why cash is being erased, not because it's outdated, not because it's inefficient, not because it enables crime. Those are excuses. The real reason is simpler. Cash lets you leave. Leave a bank, leave a policy, leave a country, leave a collapsing system. And no system in decline can allow exits. So instead of fixing the system, they redesign the money. They make money digital, traceable, programmable, conditional. They call it innovation, but it's not innovation. It's containment. History has seen this before. In 1933, during the Great Depression, Americans rushed to banks to withdraw cash. The response wasn't reassurance. It was a freeze. The government declared a bank holiday. Banks closed. Withdrawals stopped. Access vanished. And while people were locked out, the rules changed. That move saved the system, but it trapped the public. Then came the next step. Gold. Gold was the escape asset. Gold was what people converted into when they no longer trusted paper promises. So the system attacked the exit. Ownership was restricted. Convertibility ended. What was once money became illegal to hold freely. That wasn't about gold. It was about control. Because when people can leave, systems must behave. When people cannot leave, systems don't have to. Today, cash is the escape asset, and the same logic is being applied again. This time, with better tools. In the past, control required force. Now it requires software. In a cashless system, access can be changed instantly. Your money can exist and still be unreachable. Your account can remain open and still be useless. You don't need to be arrested. You don't need to be charged. You don't even need to be accused. All it takes is a policy update, a risk flag, a compliance review, a temporary restriction, and suddenly you can't move. This is why cashless systems don't feel dangerous at first. When everything is stable, nothing changes. You tap your phone, you scan your face, you go on with your day. The cage doesn't feel like a cage when the lights are on. But the moment panic hits, the moment inflation accelerates, the moment trust cracks, that's when you discover what kind of system you're in. Because in a cashless world, escape is impossible by design. There's no quiet withdrawal, no anonymous exit, no way to step outside the rules. You can only remain inside while the rules change around you. And that is why cashless systems are being pushed now. Debt levels are unpayable. Governments cannot cut spending without collapse. Inflation is the chosen solution, and trust is fragile. In that environment, people naturally try to protect themselves. They try to leave. Cashless systems stop that instinct before it starts. They don't prevent collapse. They manage it. They turn panic into compliance. And once you understand that, you realize something uncomfortable. Cashless systems aren't about efficiency. They're about ensuring that when the next crisis hits, no one can run. After Greece, people told themselves it was an exception. A small country, a unique crisis, a one-time event. That belief didn't last long. In 2013, Cyprus did something even more disturbing. Banks didn't just limit withdrawals. They took money directly from people's accounts, not through taxes, not through inflation, through a bail-in. If you had more than 100,000 euros in a Cypriot bank, part of your savings was confiscated overnight and converted into bank shares. You didn't vote on it. You weren't warned. You couldn't opt out. Your money was used to save the system that trapped it. And here's the part most people missed. Cyprus didn't invent that idea. It became the model. After 2008, regulators around the world quietly rewrote the rules. They decided that in the next crisis, taxpayers would not bail out banks. Depositors would. Your savings stopped being protected wealth and became shock absorbers for the system. That's when money officially stopped being yours. It became a tool. And tools can be used. Fast forward again. In 2020, during lockdowns, something unprecedented happened. Governments around the world proved they could pause entire economies instantly. Businesses closed by decree, movement restricted, income replaced with digital transfers. For the first time in history, millions of people survived entirely on digital money controlled by policy. And while people were focused on survival, the financial infrastructure changed. Cash usage collapsed. Branches closed. ATMs disappeared. Limits were normalized. People didn't notice because they were distracted. But systems change fastest during emergencies. That's when resistance is lowest. That's when people accept temporary rules that never fully disappear. In Canada, during the trucker protests, the financial system crossed a line that should have shocked everyone. Without court orders, without criminal charges. Bank accounts were frozen. Not because of fraud, not because of violence, because of political pressure. People who donated money had accounts flagged, access disappeared. And suddenly, millions of people saw a future they didn't like. A future where participation in society depends on staying financially obedient. That wasn't an accident. It was a test, and it worked. Because once money becomes digital, enforcement becomes effortless. No police raids, no confiscations, no headlines. Just a notification. Access restricted, transaction declined, account under review. You don't need to be guilty, you just need to be inconvenient. This is why capital controls always appear during crises. Argentina has done it repeatedly. When inflation explodes, governments don't fix the currency. They restrict movement, limits on withdrawals, limits on transfers, limits on foreign exchange. People aren't allowed to protect themselves because protection accelerates collapse. So the system sacrifices individual security to preserve collective illusion. And the illusion is stability. Look at Venezuela. As inflation destroyed the bolivar, people tried to escape into dollars. So the government restricted access, black markets emerged, controls tightened, punishment increased. Cash became contraband, not because it was illegal by nature, but because it allowed people to survive outside the system. Every failed currency follows the same logic. First inflation, then control, then punishment for escape. Cashless systems make this process instant. No need for soldiers. No need for checkpoints. Just code, just rules, just compliance. And the scariest part, most people support it. Because cashless systems are sold as moral upgrades. They're framed as safer, cleaner, more transparent. But transparency for who? Not the system, the individual. In a cashless world, every transaction becomes a data point. Every purchase becomes a behavior signal. Every saving decision becomes visible. And once behavior is visible, it can be shaped, encouraged, discouraged, restricted. This is where money stops being neutral. It becomes policy. It becomes enforcement. It becomes permission. And once money becomes permission, dissent becomes expensive. Leaving becomes impossible. Because to leave, you need mobility. And mobility requires money that can move without approval. That's what cash used to provide. That's why it must disappear. Not today, not tomorrow. Gradually, ATM by ATM, branch by branch, limit by limit. Until one day, cash still exists technically, but not functionally. And by then, it's too late. Because escape doesn't vanish all at once. It disappears quietly. While people are distracted, while people are comfortable, while people are told it's progress. And when the next crisis hits, not if, when, people will reach for exits that no longer exist. They'll realize the doors were sealed long before the fire started. By the time people realize a cashless system has trapped them, it's already too late. Because the most dangerous systems are not built through force. They're built through comfort. Nobody wakes up one day and agrees to be financially controlled. They agree to convenience, they agree to safety, they agree to just this once, and then the system hardens around them. History shows this pattern clearly. In Weimar Germany, inflation didn't destroy the system by itself. What destroyed it was the loss of confidence. People rushed to convert money into anything real: food, foreign currency, physical assets. So the government responded by restricting movement and transactions. They didn't call it control. They called it stabilization. In the Soviet Union, money technically existed, but it wasn't free. Spending was monitored, exchange was restricted, assets were permission-based. You didn't escape the system by saving, You survive by obeying it. That's the end state of every closed monetary system, not collapse, containment. Modern governments learned from these failures. They realized something important. You don't need to ban money, you just need to redesign it. In a digital, cashless system, money doesn't represent value. It represents compliance. Your ability to spend depends on alignment. Alignment with rules, alignment with policy, alignment with acceptable behavior. And the moment alignment becomes part of money, freedom disappears quietly. No speeches, no announcements, no panic, just friction. Limits here, reviews there, approvals everywhere. People don't resist because nothing dramatic happens. Life continues until it doesn't. And when the system finally cracks under debt, demographics, or war, something crucial changes. The system doesn't ask for cooperation anymore. It demands it. This is why cashless systems accelerate during instability. Because collapse creates urgency. Urgency justifies control, and control becomes permanent. Every major institution already understands this. Central banks openly discuss programmable money. They talk about expiration dates, spending conditions, restricted categories. They frame it as economic efficiency. But what they are really describing is a world where money tells you what you are allowed to do, not the other way around. This is why saving becomes pointless in late-stage systems. Because saving is preparation for independence. And independence is the one thing collapsing systems cannot tolerate. That's why savings are punished through inflation. That's why withdrawals are capped. That's why exits are sealed. Because once people can leave, the system must change. And the system is built to change you instead. So when people ask why cash is disappearing, they're asking the wrong question. Cash isn't disappearing because it failed. Cash is disappearing because it worked too well. It worked as an escape. An escape is unacceptable in a world drowning in debt. The end game is simple. A population that cannot exit. A system that cannot be questioned. And money that cannot disobey. Not through tyranny, through design. And history shows where this always leads, not to stability, but to stagnation, resentment, and eventual rupture. Because systems that cannot release pressure eventually explode. And when they do, the people trapped inside pay the highest price. If you want to understand how money, power, and control actually work beneath the surface, if you want to recognize these patterns before they finish locking into place, subscribe. Because the people who understand the system early are never the ones crushed by it at the end. And this channel exists to make sure you're not one of them.